to Leading for Life Stories Season 4. I'm Bob Judson. I'm the host for this podcast, and thank you very, very much indeed for joining me. Whether you're a new joiner or a seasoned listener, then I really, really hope you enjoy the mix of content that we provide. The personal stories, the thematic episodes, and of course, the fantastic guest interviews. If you've been with me since the beginning, then I'm enormously grateful for your loyalty and thank you so much. If you're relatively new to the show, then I really hope you like it and I hope you find all of it interesting and some of it hopefully useful to you. Please subscribe on whichever channel it is you're using, whether it's YouTube, whether it's a podcast platform. That really helps us boost the show and get it over the hills on the algorithms. So if you can do that for me, I would be enormously grateful. But without further ado, let's go. Welcome back, everybody. My guest this week is Andrew Dyckhoff. Andrew has had the most amazing CEO career, multifaceted, very diverse different industries. He talks all about it in terms of the journey, starting out actually in professional services at the very beginning, but then very quickly moving into quite an entrepreneurial streak of things, which he continues to this day, having founded a company called Energizing Leaders, which we talk quite extensively about. So we're essentially operating in very similar fields with what we do now. And as a result, you can imagine that we had a terrific conversation on all sorts of aspects around leadership, his own personal leadership, what we're seeing with leaders more generally, some of the advice and tips for leaders that are out there. So I really, really think this will be a good episode if you're interested in getting some thoughts around stuff that's important and the stuff that people are seeing and talking about. And I hope you enjoy it. Off we go. Andrew, welcome. Fantastic to have you on the show. Really great. I think it's always interesting. I've done a number of these interviews where I've met people and interviewed people who are working in kind of similar-ish fields to the one I am, and so I'm sure we'll have a great conversation about lots of really pertinent stuff.
Absolutely, Bob, and it's an honor and a privilege to be invited. So thank you.
No, not at all. No, privilege is mine. I'm very grateful to you for the time. Let's just get us started. You've had a fascinating and really diverse career. I mean, you've been, multiple CEO roles. You're the founder now of Energizing Leaders, and as I said at the beginning, we've come from different start points, but we're doing similar sort of stuff. So just give us a bit of flesh on those bones, if you like, in terms of your career journey to get you to where you are today.
Thank you, Bob. Well, you're right. I mean, I have had a diverse career, and in fact, I would say my career started when I was 11, when I persuaded the mother of a friend of mine to take us strawberry picking and then drive down the road while we knocked on the doors and sold the strawberries. And bless her, she didn't even ask for petrol money or anything. So I think there's something of the entrepreneur that's buried deep within. And in fact, my family goes back to 1522 in Osnabrück. And my father was the first person ever in the history of the family not to have their own business and to be employed by others. So I think it's somehow in the genes. And when I was at university, I used to enjoy my life at university and run up large overdrafts and paid them off by having a small building works business. So and I had an early lesson in employment. The second year, I thought I'd employ a bunch of other students and scale up. That was a huge mistake. Spent all my life running around correcting their work. And so the third year, I went back to myself and just made more money that way. So there's something about the entrepreneur. I can't help myself. And I started out life actually with an English degree from Cambridge, so not much use in terms of employment. And like so many Brits, I decided that chartered accountancy was the way in. So I joined Pricewaterhouse. They claimed that they would work me less hard than Anderson's. They lied. I won the prize for the most weekends worked in PricewaterhouseCoopers, and we were Pricewaterhouse then. So it was a funny time. It was a bit like the Wild West, really. No regulators. If you could sell it, they sold it, and they just said, "Yep, go do this, make it up. We'll charge lots of money." And I loved that, being thrown serially in the deep end, constant variety, amazing. And it wouldn't happen today because everything's so tightly controlled. But back in the day, we had a lot of fun. And I was too maverick ever to make partner. So about 3 years in, woke up to the fact I better get a proper job. So joined Olympus Cameras and joined as the financial controller. A month later, the finance director resigned to go to another job, and I was given the chance to act up. So that's when I learned the value of hard work. So I used to work from 9 in the morning, caught the 1:20 train home 5 days a week for 18 months, turned this thing around, and at the early age of 28 became a finance director of a 100 million turnover business.
Wow.
And it was a baptism of whatever. The business was losing money hand over fist. The yen exchange rate had halved, so we went from obscene profits to massive losses. And the joke from the CEO at the time, he used to pretend to be typing on the table, "Dear Price Waterhouse, maybe I was a bit hasty in applying for a different job." He used to tease me. He said, your job, Andrew, you're the finance guy. Your job is to carry the wallet and go to jail if I mess up."
Great. That's not in your job spec, I presume, though. That was the
Not in
informal.
my job spec. But fantastic. What an amazing opportunity to be given at a very, very young age. And so I did that for finance roles for 10 years. I went into the European company as well. And then got a bit bored, said, "Hey, guys, I'm off. I'm going to do something else." And no, don't go. Here's a little business for you to run. It's the microscope business. Microscopes are pretty boring in their eyes. It's just, watch the cash. You're a finance guy. You get on with it. 3 weeks in, I decided the guy running it, who was also a personal friend, was completely incompetent and had to go. Full kudos to my boss. He said, that wasn't the deal, but I've given you the job. So if you're going to fire this guy, fire him, but no one else. So that was the deal. So I fired my friend, who then went on to do great things elsewhere, and we stayed friends, which was amazing. But that was the start of my CEO career at the tender age of 32, and that went well. We doubled doubled profits in 2 years, increased sales by 50%, and I got given ever bigger CEO roles in that healthcare sector. And then I was the CEO of Olympus, Switzerland, so a region, and came back to run the diagnostic business. During that time, I discovered that people who receive blood transfusions, back then in late 90s, early 2000s, 250 people in England alone every year got the wrong blood. And I decided this was a scandal. I went to see the Department of Health, senior official. It looked down his genuinely aquiline nose with the sort of pince-nez specs, said, "Better people than you had tried and failed, dear boy. I shouldn't bother." And the red mist descended, and I swore to myself that I would prove him wrong. It took me 5 years. It nearly literally killed me. This was a too important to fail mission. People are dying almost every day, completely sailed past any self-care. We might come back to talk about some of this, because they decided that they couldn't continue to invest in the business, so I got fired from being the CEO of that. That was really hard. But then they rang me up 3 months later and said, "Oh, we can't kill your business. You're too close to government. Come back." And we got it off the ground. And so all around the world, if you get a blood transfusion, you're safe, because it was copied. It wasn't patentable, so I'm not wealthy. But one has the satisfaction that our little team changed the face of medical care in a small way forever.
What did you actually do? What was the kind of the product, in inverted commas, that you?
Yeah. So the problem was that human beings aren't very good at following protocols consistently, and added to which, patients did not have proper labeling in bed. They had handwritten labels, not then correlated in any way with the bed space they were in, and there was no custody of control between the blood sample that was then typed back to the blood that was then transfused. And so there were various ways that you could get the wrong blood. One was you moved bed, and the blood would come to the bed, but someone else was in the bed. Pretty grim. Or you were given the wrong blood because the nurse literally picked out the wrong packet from the fridge. So, and variations on the theme. And what we did was we barcoded the labels, embedded the data in the barcode label, so that even if the system went down, when you scanned it, you still had the accurate information. And we did all sorts of fun things, like convert sandwich fridges to dispense blood bags, so that you could to get the blood, you had to scan a label, scan the patient, scan the request, scan to the fridge. So you literally physically could not get the wrong blood.
Wow.
And it was incredibly complex, politically very controversial. Hospital management fought the clinical staff. Nurses hated being told what to do by machines as they saw it. The handheld scanners were linked to a computer system. It was a real odyssey, yeah. But we got there. We got there.
Oh,
So,
that's an amazing achievement. I mean, you must be really proud of that because that, as you say, that becomes a bit of a mission, and it's quite altruistic to do that. And I think, genuinely, as you say, you're saving lives by doing it, and against obviously significant institutional resistance as well. So, no, well done you.
yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, definitely. I joke, but not really, that if I were to die tomorrow, I could go to my maker thinking, in a small way, I made a dent in the universe, and not just me. I mean, I had half a dozen other people who were equally mad who came with me, and yeah, so definitely. I mean, that was undoubtedly the most significant thing that I've done in my career, and I came off the back of that pretty exhausted, actually. I mean, in the modern parlance, you would say I had high functioning burnout. And so it took me a year or so to recover. And whilst I was trying to work out what to do with myself, I came across the work I do now. And the company I used to bring in to do my leadership training took me in to be a leadership trainer and taught me everything they knew. And I discovered that I have a real passion and love for this stuff. And so I did that for a while. Then I joined Merrick and Co. as the CEO. So Merrick and Co. is the former chief executives who mentor current and aspiring chief executives. Um, uh, that was a roller coaster. We could cover that later if you want. But we built a business, a very substantial business, doing that work. And as often happens with entrepreneurs, my co-owner and I had a difference of view as to the future direction of the business. We sold that business. He stayed, and I started Energizing Leaders to build the business I always wanted to build. And that brings us pretty much to today, where I'm busy now. I'm in what they call the difficult middle, when things are working but not yet flying. So I'm definitely living the values of persistence and resilience right now.
Yeah, I think interestingly, a number of things you said across the course of that, really spark in me that, I mean, that the genetic thing. Not, I know I haven't got the entrepreneurial gene at all, but I've definitely got the genetic thing from my father. I mean, I never really knew my father. He died when I was 3, and yet obviously that was what took me into the Air Force. He was in the Air Force, he was an Air Force pilot, and I can, that's the most obvious association I've got with that, and I think that's really interesting, and I think the diversity and the challenge of what you're doing now in terms of running a business. I mean, I'm doing the same thing, but on a very small scale, just with me, and trying to effectively give back some of the stuff that I've learned over the years in a useful way. And yeah, it's hard work. I mean, I think anybody that tells you it's not hard work to do this sort of portfolio-y thing and have a bunch of different strands and have to manage your own own pipeline the whole way and all the rest of it it's really difficult. So yeah, hats off to you. And I think what's interesting as well is just listening to the story, as it were, the progression from through all of that, where you genuinely have built on what you've done before to even though they're quite different. I mean, clearly doing the medical thing from Olympus cameras originally is very different, and and I think it's absolutely fascinating how you can diversify like that and set yourself up so well for what you're now doing. Because one of my main comments that I tend to make to a lot of people in terms of leadership training is that I think that the sad thing is lots of people don't get any leadership training meaningfully. They'll get osmosis. They'll sit there and be thrown into jobs, and they might sink or they might swim. And sometimes they'll get the odd intervention, and they'll get the odd person that they're watching as a sort of role model, and they can look at and decide this is how I want to lead my team, etc. But putting some formality around that and putting a bit of extra help in terms of the tools and tips and all the rest of it, I think is massively beneficial, which is kind of why I do what I do, and I think that's probably what you're doing as well with Energizing Leaders, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the main motivation for Energizing Leaders is I never got any training. I had to work it out for myself. and mostly I got lucky. But that's not a smart way to go about things. And when I compare and contrast it with the forces, I'm not close to the Air Force, but I have friends in the Navy. And I remember on one occasion being invited to take part in a large-scale naval exercise with multiple ships or boats, I suspect they're probably called. But anyway, and just hearing how on board, it was all pre-planned, pre-practiced. If a missile took out the main control module, you had alternative command posts at either end, all of which instantly kicked in. People had rehearsed it, and I was blown away by that. And I think in the world of business, as it were, it's naive that we don't think that way, and we cause ourselves all manner of grief that could be avoided. And in terms of my own career, I suspect one of your questions will be, who did you look up to? Who were your mentors? I had very few role models, and mostly I do what I do now because I want other people to benefit from the wisdom of experience, so they don't have to make the crass errors that we had to make and learn the hard way.
Yeah, no, I have exactly the same view. I mean, I have kind of positive role models and negative role models, to be honest. I mean, I very often talk about the fact that, I kind of look at my own leadership style as an amalgam of the things that I liked that I've stolen from other people by and large, or I've learned myself and they've been successful, or equally things that I don't like and I'm never going to do. And I've got those firmly in the, this is the stuff I'm not going to not only not do myself, but not tolerate if I'm working with people and running teams of people. Because I think you do see all sorts in that game. I mean, interestingly, on the forces point, I think it's not. And I said this on several podcasts before. I think it's not about military leadership being the be all and end all. I would never be one to subscribe to that. I think there are some terrible military leaders as well as some really, really great ones. What it does do, though, is it gives you a lot of training, and it gives you a lot of training very early on. So the first thing you do, particularly in the officer world, at either Dartmouth, Sandhurst, or Cranwell in the UK, is you go to officer school essentially, and you get taught to lead people, and then on top of that, you do whatever you're going to do as a specialist skill. So in my case, flying airplanes, so learn to be a pilot. And that's completely different to the corporate model pretty much anywhere I've seen. I've never seen anybody who does that. I think what most corporates do is they'll hire you based on your qualifications and experience, train you to do what they want you to do, and you'll get promoted and be successful on the basis of whether you're good at that thing. And if that's sales or that's marketing or whatever else, then that takes you in that kind of direction. But I don't think there's really any normal interventions that people get where they're really looking specifically at leadership in most organizations. There are some exceptions, but certainly most organizations.
Well, I think the point here is it used to be the case that happened. So if you look at now long gone British institutions like Courtaulds, for instance, they used to do exactly that. They had a graduate program which was essentially officer school, and then you were rotated through the business to try different roles, different specialisms, to discover what it is you're good at. And then once you found it, you were then promoted and etc. And I think that's much the best way to do things. But of course, the combination of the change of the contract, you're not expected to work for your life for the same company, and all the changes that we've seen and loved with the internet, etc. That model is not sustainable because businesses can't afford to invest in people because they're not going to stay. But that's really negative. Now, I can't knock it too much because that's why I've got a great business, but because essentially what we're doing is we're backfilling what's missing, and I'm constantly reflect on when I look at just how much you can help people, often in their late 40s, early 50s, shift and learn and transform. My goodness, if we started when they were 30, what could we do with them?
No, totally so. I completely agree, and I share your view. And at the end of the day, that's why I'm in business doing what I'm doing as well. So, and I think it's interesting how some organizations, even quite people-focused organizations, where that's people are their primary asset, are not necessarily good at this. And I mean, interestingly, so a good example from my point of view is Deloitte, where actually I do a lot of work with Deloitte University, and actually I think they are pretty good at it. They do, they've set that up. They've obviously recognised at the partnership level that they need to do better in terms of growing their people and giving them some more skills. So that's exactly what they do. Sadly, it doesn't. Those programs don't hit everybody. And it's very much they'll kind of look at who in theory they hit everybody at the milestone stage when they're promoted to different grades, but the reality is commercial pressures and so on prevent that. But it's at least better, a lot better than I worked with a totally different organisation, which I should remain nameless, a while ago, where they said to me, I was busy talking about relationship management and things, and which was part of what I was there hired to do for the day. And we started talking about leadership, and they said, "Well, do you actually do that? Because we'd love that. Because we don't, we've basically got to a position where we're building and running and owning teams, and we don't have a clue really. No one's given us any skills to do that, and it's all osmosis. It's all just try it and see whether it works or not, which is far too often the case. So no, I think it's such an important thing to have access to it. I just wish, obviously from a business point of view, as much as anything else, I wish more companies were kind of recognized that and were willing to turn around and put the effort in to do it, because I think there are plenty of people out there doing what we do and probably doing it very well. And it's just a question of companies actually sort of putting their hand in the pocket a little bit and tapping into it to some extent, and investing in people younger too. To your point about 40s and 50s, I mean, I think some of the time, it's not about C-suite level training at coaching or whatever necessarily. You could do far better if you do it earlier and you give them some some ideas and some help that is going to shape what they do and let them grow into better leaders and still continue that. I tend to say to people, leadership's a journey you're never ever going to finish. You're going to be learning until you draw your last breath, hopefully. Unless you're the kind of person that chooses not to do that, then the right approach is definitely that you're always in this for the long game as a continual learner.
Well, I think that's right, and there's very good evidence that the further you're stretched early in your career, the better your career trajectory is in terms of leadership. And I think one of the challenges that we have today is with our young people is because we exist in such highly regulated and risk-averse environments. If you think the trust that was put in me super early on, even at Pricewaterhouse, at the age of 23, I was running an audit team with 26 people in it. It was the most important client for the whole firm. It was Trust House Forte. You would never in a million years dream of doing that today. So I do think there's a generational thing. I think we had opportunities that really literally don't exist today. And I don't know what we do about it, but it is very clear that if you give people that early stretch, their capacity for growth increases.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I tend to talk to people about take the safety net away, empower them early, give them an opportunity to succeed. And it's amazing how often they do. And I mean, you obviously have to be prepared as a leader to own it when it doesn't work. And you've done that, you've trusted someone and it's, they've the best of their efforts, it's gone wrong and you have to protect them and give them the kind of right support so they don't get thrown under the bus. But to your point on the PwC thing, when I was out in Germany in the Jaguar Force in the Cold War with an atom bomb on the bottom of the airplane and a single seat airplane as a 21-year-old. It was quite a responsible job. And I do think occasionally, we don't have that kind of right approach. It's got to be right. We'll have to have the right kind of top heavy team. And interestingly, I welcome your view on this. I think when you look at the growth of AI in organizations now, and certainly anecdotally, I'm hearing from a number of people that, particularly when they're hiring consultants, etc., that they're really interested in that. I want the senior people because I want the senior advisors, but I don't want all the kind of the junior end because I see them just as an unnecessary overhead. And of course, the reality is you've got to have them because how do you grow the senior people if you don't train
100%,
them?
Bob, 100%. I think if you're in professional services now, that question of how do you teach people to have the judgment that comes through experience in the absence of that experience is a really interesting and possibly existential inquiry. So it'll be fascinating to watch that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Hey, switch tack a little bit but staying on the leadership theme. I mean, your journey, which we talked about. I mean, you've grown through a number of different organizations. The podcast obviously focuses on leadership, and when you look at yourself personally and kind of reflect a little bit on your style, your approach, what have you learned along the way? How have you changed? Whether it's, is that kind of unconscious, conscious? What's your kind of development?
So that's a great question and hard to find a short answer. But I think I do believe there are natural leaders, people who have an instinct for leadership, and I suspect I was one of those. Uh, so I would make intuitive decisions, and mostly they seem to go well. I think where I struggled was to truly value collaboration. I published an article that's still on our website, if you go back, called "Are You a Lamplighter?" And the metaphor there is the 19th century streets of Paris were the first to be gas lit. And so the gas lamp has a source of gas coming up over a mantle. And by regulating the flow of the gas and the condition of the mantle, you could get the light to burn more brightly. And I was definitely one of those. I wanted to be the brightest light. And it took me quite a long time to realize that actually, as a leader, your job is to get everyone 10% brighter, because that completely swamps out even the maximum light one individual can generate. And I do think it took me a long time to learn to, what they say, suffer fools gladly, which of course is a terrible expression. But it's and I think that's one of the hardest lessons. We promote people who are hardworking. If someone else doesn't do it, they do it anyway. We give them all these amounts of praise for habits that, in terms of proper leadership, are negative. And so I think that was probably the largest transition for me, and really learning to take less space in the room. I always had something to contribute, something to say, or whatever. And as a leader, genuinely being able to arrive at a degree of humility, and I definitely struggled with humility. There's a lovely expression called a fig jam moment. Have you ever come across a fig jam moment?
No.
So it stands for F dot dot dot. I'm good. Just ask me.
Very good. I'll steal that. I haven't heard that. That's excellent.
Yeah, fig jam. So I was definitely a fig jam kind of guy, and it took me a long time to grow genuine humility and recognize that actually not only were you not as clever as you think you are, but actually doesn't serve you or help you in the organizational context. And of course, that's more and more true now, because certainly over my career, and it's 40, whatever it is, 45 years now I've been in work. The world has definitely changed. I mean, the complexity that any individual and groups of individuals and organizations have to deal with is by a factor of, I have no idea how big the factor is, but it's definitely a much harder place to be now. And therefore, this idea that one smart individual can know all the answers and set the direction and etc. Personally, now I think is laughable, even though you still see people try. So I do think that what we need from our leaders has kind of always been true, but in a funny sort of way, it's more true now than ever.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think to your point about the way the world has changed, I mean, my perception is one of the things, and it is only one of the things that's changed in that space, is your space to fail and learn has shrunk dramatically, because I think and that's why I think one of the leadership skills that's really important as a leader is to protect your team and show loyalty to your team and allow them to to develop and make mistakes, because they're so visible now. Whereas I think not that long ago, you could get away with doing stuff quite easily, and actually no one will make any kind of fuss about it. Now it's too transmissible, too visible. This, as you said earlier on, in terms of lots of the way lots of organizations work now, they are very structured, focused on accountability, and so on and so forth. So, and there isn't a tolerance for try it out and then find that it didn't work and have another go. It's commercially non-viable to do that. So I think that's one of the things that's definitely made it really challenging.
I'm a huge fan of a chap called George Colreeser, who teaches now at IMD. If you've not come across him, certainly look him out. He's very interesting guy. He made his name as a psychologist involved in very high-profile hostage cases, and he successfully talked a number of terrorists or whatever down. And then he translated those skills into the business context. And he has a concept that he calls leader as belayer. So the guy who sits at the bottom of the cliff, and as far as the person who's climbing the cliff is concerned, it's a free climb. But then at the bottom, they're holding the rope. If they fall off the cliff, they catch them. And you know, his title of the book is Care to Dare, and his premise is that if you give genuine freedom to people and at the same time hold full accountability that if they fail, it's your fault as a leader, then that's the way to go. That's when people do their best work. And I'm 100% behind that. My CEO mantra is it's always all my fault. It's always all my fault. And that's a very simple idea. People don't come to work to do a bad job, or very few do. You know, if someone fails, it was my fault for hiring them or giving them the task in the first place, or not supporting them appropriately, or whatever. And I certainly think if you can hold that as a leader, two things. One, it inspires huge followership, which is helpful. And secondly, it does give people that freedom to attempt things they might otherwise duck.
Yeah, no, we used to talk a lot about mission command, and essentially that was tell me what to do, not how to do it, and give you a box to play in. And that box could be quite big if you were confident that the individual had or team had the skills and the experience and everything else to do the job well. Or it could be a tiny little box if actually you felt that you needed tighter boundaries and you had to come back and refer to me if you're going to go outside the box. And it really does make a difference. Interesting, there's a book very much to your theme there called Extreme Ownership. Not sure if you've read that. That's written by a couple of Navy SEALs, and I actually it is a good book, and I agree with a lot. That's not everything that's in it, but I agree with in an awful lot that of the stuff that's in it. But I would recommend reading it, not listening to it. I tend to do audiobooks these days because these two Navy SEALs, it's essentially they're chewing nails while they're reading the book. You know, yeah. You get the full sense that that's their kind of lifestyle.
So that's what I call the know-how zone. So imagine a no entry sign with the word "how" across it with a line through it. So NOHOW, the know-how zone.
Yeah. No, I think it's completely fair. I mean, going back to your lamplighter thing, I often use gas lights in a different context, though. I tend to talk about if you're running a team, then if you think of one of those kind of camping lights with exactly that, it's got gas and it's got a flame, and you can turn it up or down. And obviously, if you turn it really brightly, you're going to burn out the mantle at the top, and also you're going to use the gas more quickly. And you need to manage the gas so that you're actually keeping the team at a sustainable level. Because if you're not careful, everyone runs everywhere at maximum intensity, which is not sustainable. You are going to burn people out. You're going to find that they can't. There is nowhere else to go. When there's a genuine crisis now that you need them to be turning the wick up and going harder, faster. How are you going to do that? They're already running at full pelt. So making the world more manageable, which is not something that comes naturally to a lot of organizations, never mind individuals these days. I think it is something that is worth thinking about. Personal traits. What do you, in amongst all of that lot, what do you hold dear? I mean, you're teaching leadership stuff and helping leaders to get better and so on. What do you think are the key things that leaders need and that you really value?
So that's a super interesting question. So one of the things that I do think there are leadership traits that are universal. And I have a competing belief that everyone is unique and therefore everyone needs to lead in their own way. And the best leaders know themselves really well and play to their strengths. So, energizing leaders, our end line is strengths unleashed, because the route to both being energized and energizing others is through understanding and then amplifying your strengths. And classically, we talk about leaders who are inspirational. There are many ways to be inspirational, and there's very good evidence and data. Bain did a huge study. Zenga Folkman in the US have shown that the capacity to inspire is one of the really critical elements of people who deliver extraordinary business results from their people. And yet, there are so many different ways to do that. And, I am a classic, bounce up and down Tigger kind of leader. So I am full of energy and I walk into the room and you always walk out energized, and mostly the energy hangs around after I've gone, but it does diminish over time. The leaders I often admire are those who are much quieter, often quite introverted leaders who have this extraordinary capacity to connect you with the things that will fire you up. So you create sort of autotelic response. People energize themselves, and in many ways, I think that's the most powerful form of leadership. The so-called level 5 leader. I'm not that. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and yeah, that's just how I am.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Inspiration is key, no doubt about it. I think I say to people regularly, if you can't inspire people as a leader, then they're not going to follow you for very long. I mean, they'll follow you out of curiosity for a bit, but I mean, if they don't actually believe in what you're doing and you're not inspiring them to do it, then the chances of them following you, other than because they absolutely have to, or for pure curiosity reasons, is very limited. And I think that it goes back to the age-old debate about leadership and management, doesn't it? Where I tend to say, right, for me, I define a single word. Leadership is about inspiration, management is about process. So you actually you can have obviously people who are both, and lots of leaders are great managers, but there are equally lots of leaders that actually recognize they're not the best managers, and they get people in to manage for them and do all the sort of processy stuff because they are the inspiration that's behind the organization. I tend to also be very big on leading by example. I think if you're not prepared to roll your sleeves up and be properly part of the team, then again, you're not going to have a loyalty element from the team for very long. But we do an interesting exercise quite often when doing this stuff where we'll actually, if it's a room full of people, we'll draw out a whole bunch of leadership traits, throw them on a flip chart, and of course you get this big long list of probably 20 or 30 things at least, and I say to people, look, you'll look at that and you'll go, I'm good at these things, but I'm not so good at these things. And I think it's very much about recognizing in yourself, where are your strengths, to your point, and where are your areas where you're not so strong, and can I either develop those individually, or can I actually find a way to to get people in that, making sure I'm covering those. So I've actually got within the team, I've got people who are good at whatever it is that I'm particularly missing. I mean, I think there are some things that are quite key that you've got to have. Humility is a good one as a leader for sure. I think you're as well as inspiration, as well as leading by example, and a certain amount of credibility obviously helps too. But there are an awful lot of things you can make up with other people and being honest with other people. When I took command of RF Coningsby, I mean, I was taking over as a base commander. I'd never done that before. It was a one-off job, running 2,500 people in a whole station. And not only was I doing that, I was also running the introduction of the Eurofighter Typhoon. Normally, as a station commander in the Air Force, what you do is you're going into running an organization with a type that you have already flown. So you have lots of credibility, lots of experience, in the air environment, and then everything else just comes as a bit of an add-on. And I said to my guys very early on, look, you got to help me here. I've never flown an airplane with a radar. I don't. I've never done the air defense role. I've been a ground attack guy all my life. So it's really important that we work together to get the best outcomes we could. And I think, I mean, talking to a few people, with hindsight about that, they really respected the fact that I was prepared to kind of nail it down and say, look, I don't know everything here, and I'm not the one with all the great ideas. I absolutely need your input. And too often people don't do that. They kind of walk in with the I'm leading, therefore I must know everything. I mean, it's impossible, isn't it? You can't do that.
Well, it is completely impossible. I'm obsessed with data in the world of leadership. And I reflected the other day, in fact, that this goes back to my Cambridge days studying English. So a guy called F.R. Leavis is behind the Cambridge course. And his basic premise was it's perfectly possible to analyze the impact of the words that authors used and discern their intent and observe why the words that they use have the impact that they have. And I think it's ironic that here I am 50 years later, probably, I'm still doing the same thing, because we talk about wisdom and science. So the leader leadership isn't this fluffy thing. It's not a soft skill. For us, it's a hard skill. There is craft to leadership. You can absolutely develop that, but there's a lot of science. And if you look at the data, in this case, data for some 250,000 business leaders correlated with business performance, as well as inspiring, the other thing that stands out is your capacity to drive for results. So to keep people focused on what's most important and hold them accountable for delivery. And what they've demonstrated from the research is that the magic happens when you have both.
Mm.
And so you can have driving for results, and this is the most common way around, with the lack of inspiring. And the measures for inspiration are energy. So Energizing Leaders was born from observing that data. And I woke up one day and thought, that's the art here. We need to have people focused on, are they energizing the people and the organization? And the data is really clear. So you need both of those things to maximize the opportunity. In our case, we would argue you need the wisdom and experience to interpret the analysis and help you turn that insight into action.
Yeah, fascinating, isn't it? I mean, energy is a good one. That's always on, if I'm just speaking and presenting this, on my big list of traits, energy will be one of them. And fascinatingly, I was doing a piece of work with an organization a while back where one of the people in the audience was, I said, I had this big list up and I said, well, any of those that surprise you, any that you kind of want to challenge, any that you disagree with? And somebody said, well, why have you got energy up there? I just looked and I said, well, if I don't have energy as a leader and I don't energize the room and bring energy into the conversation, why on earth should you? If I'm trying to energize a team, I think from a leadership point of view, it's really important that you have that. If you're a facilitator of a training event, if you're not energetic and enthusiastic about it, then funny old thing, the audience pretty picks up on that vibe very, very quickly, and they're not at all enthusiastic about it. So it was a great opportunity to kind of throw that in there. But I was quite surprised to get the question from quite a senior individual that they kind of were challenging why do you need that?
Yeah. Well, we talk about 3 critical conditions for success. The first is you have to have the right capability. And that operates at multiple levels. So it operates at the individual level. Have I got the right training, knowledge, skills, and experience? And at the organization level, have I got the right resources? Is my product fit for purpose in the market I'm in? Then the second element is focus. So you need the right goal. It needs to be a goal that's inherently motivational, that it's worth pursuing. And then the third element is energy. And because at the end of the day, if you've got the right capability and the right focus, but no energy, life's a chore. And if you've got the energy and the focus, but not the competence or the capability, you're a novice at best. And if you stay in that space, of course, you're scheduled to fail. And then you do get the people who've got the energy and the capability without the focus, and that's called hobbyism. And of course, the professional services used to be full of hobbyists. Now in the new world, they're really, really not. But that's I think it's a very simple model, those 3 elements. But at the intersection there's a sweet spot where you as an individual and the organization performs at its best.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I think I love the analogies as well. I mean, I think interestingly, it's one of those areas too where you've got to manage it. You've only got so much of it, and I think that's also pretty important as an individual to recognize that. You mentioned it earlier on. Putting yourself at risk of burnout. That is often a feature, I think, for an awful lot of individuals in leadership roles, that they feel they're indispensable, that they feel they've got to be constantly on. They can't get themselves away from their phone. Even if they're on holiday, they never put an out of office on, which I just think fundamentally is a real mistake. I think you as an individual need the downtime. You need to need the proper space to rest and recuperate, recharge the batteries. But the other important thing, and again, I make the point regularly to people, is it's back to this empowerment thing. If you're running an organization or a team within an organization, then actually when you're away, someone else can run that for you and get better. And whoever you've got as a competent deputy, giving them proper opportunity to not be micromanaged, not be feeling that they're always got to refer everything to you. that's a really big opportunity you can give
Yeah,
to somebody.
I 100% agree, Bob. I've only met, and I've worked with many hundreds of leaders now over the years. I've only probably met a handful who are genuinely, as the CEO, not busy.
Mm.
And that my definition of an extraordinary leader is a leader who is not busy. They have built an organization. They look after the organization. I often say there are three things that the CEO has to do. They either have to set or confirm the strategy. They then have to recruit the people to fulfill the strategy, and then their job is to look after those people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you spend, a third of your time doing stuff, a third of your time looking after the people, there should be a third of your time where your job is to think, to observe, to meet customers, to detect the weak signals that could come and get you, and the weak signals that represent the opportunities 5, 10, 20 years' time. And my goodness me, there are so few people who do that. And Warren Buffett is famously one of those who does. He only has a very few meetings in his diary because he says, my job is to think. And we pay lip service to that, but as I've only found maybe 5 or 6 people in my career who really do work that way.
No, it's a really terrific point, and I think for the other reason I think it's really relevant is for aspiration for people underneath you, because I think if you're looking up through the organization at a top end of it at the C-suite level where everyone is absolutely threaded all the time. They look completely exhausted. They constantly look as though they're under enormous pressure. They're not necessarily looking as though they're enjoying what they're doing. You kind of go, well, do I want to be that guy or that girl in 20 years' time? I mean, that's not necessarily where I want to be. And I think that, I can think of a number of organizations where that is a challenge. You're looking at people at the top end of it who are thrashing themselves constantly, in a very unhelpful way, and sending completely the wrong kind of message to those that are underneath them. Because probably they could release a lot of stuff to just let the team get on with it and trust them and empower them and all the rest of it. B, actually, they're just looking up and going, "Well, this is what it's like. I'm not really sure I want to do it."
Well, my primary criteria for employing people, and particularly in a small business like ours, is that they share my mantra, which is seek forgiveness, not permission.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I need self starters, and I'm very happy to give people the freedom in which to operate. But to your point, in larger corporations, that's rare in senior leaders because, as you say, the stakes are seen to be so high.
Yeah, no, the forgiveness, not permission thing, I think is absolutely right. And there's far too many people who are constantly, they've got to get everything approved. And to be fair, some of them, I think they've grown up that way because they've worked with leaders who insist on that. And that's back to the looking at the style you model yourself on thing, because unless you see different ways of doing it, it's very difficult to take yourself out of that space and be a kind of different leader, which I think is again is one of the opportunities you get from being exposed to some more ideas and thoughts and opportunities. I mean, certainly I always say to groups of people, you're not going to like everything I say to you. I hope you like at least some of it, and I hope a few things that I actually say to you are actually genuinely really useful to you. But I'm perfectly clear that you will not think everything I say is brilliant, because probably you'll have a completely different perspective on it, and it's not your style and not the way you want to do it, and that's again just fine. I mean, you touched on role models earlier and said you didn't really have any going up. I mean, in terms of your look now at approaches and people you regard in the leadership space, you mentioned Warren Buffett. I mean, are there others you would turn around and hold up a hand?
So in my career as I grew up, I had a few mentors. The one of the most amazing mentors I had was a guy called Alan. When I was promoted to be finance director, wet behind the ears, 27 years of age. I got the title when I was 28. I didn't have the knowledge and experience, and I was looking for someone to help with the workload because I was burning a candle at both ends, right? And I went to Michael Page and said, "Who have you got in your books?" And I got this intriguing CV that was an amazing CV, and then it had some ridiculously little salary at the top. So I've got to see this guy because either the salary is wrong or the CV is wrong. And Alan walked into my office, and I opened with, which is untrue, the salary or the CV. And Alan laughed and said, "Well, I thought if I put £100,000 salary, bearing in mind this was 1986, and a Ferrari as my company car, I wouldn't get too much temporary accounting work." And in that moment we became firm friends. And he was a super experienced finance guy who was just starting up his own business and needed some cash to tide him along whilst he was doing that. He taught me everything he knew, and that was amazing. And so I owe him a huge debt of gratitude.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, that's always good to have people like that, isn't it? And particularly if you've got long-term relationships that you can kind of lean back on. I think again, sometimes people don't have that because they're too peripatetic, I suppose. Now they migrate around different jobs too quickly, and they don't necessarily form those kind of relationships, which is a shame because I think they are genuinely really valuable. If I look across my Air Force career in particular, I can think of a good number of people who actually not all of them above me, some of them peers, and some people that have worked for me who I would really lean on for advice and be able to turn around and get some support from, which I think is also
Yeah.
important.
The funny thing I find, Bob, I don't know whether you find this, is that I find myself now learning so much from my clients.
Yeah.
And I remember one lady who she's now retired, but I sort of discovered her. So she was running a small part of a very large global business's R&D, and she is one of those people, a natural leader. And I brought this up to the organization, and she went from running 5,000, a budget of I can't remember the budget, but like 500 people to 5,000 people in one go. She went from being a relatively junior leader to leading the whole thing, and it was my privilege to support her through that. And she taught me that if you choose it to be, life is an adventure. And she stepped into that full humility, very happy for the support. And at the same time, she genuinely had fun, and it was an adventure. And that was such a big lesson for me and my life, and relatively late in my life, really. So I'm hugely grateful to Trish for that. Another guy I have a huge amount of time for was a guy called Andy Harrison. So he was CEO at EasyJet before he went to Whitbread, and was hugely successful in Whitbread in particular. And he was, I always say to leaders that they should have a personal brand and they should invest in their personal brand and manage your network. He didn't do any of that stuff. He was just an amazing leader and a very humble, not in your face leader. And he had a number of different, I mean, he still has, he's very much with us. He's a chair of different businesses now. And he used to say two things. One is that I'll know how good I've been in 5 years' time, because the decisions I'm making today will impact, or should impact, right? If you're the CEO, the decisions you're making today should impact the business for 5 years. He made the decision for EasyJet to choose Gatwick as their hub. And even now, 10, 15 years later, that was 100% the right decision. But he had an extraordinary capacity to engender belief in you. And if you had a budget, say, of 100, and he needed the budget to be 150, he could talk to you and you'd come out of the room with a budget of 150, and most importantly, believing it was the right budget and you could absolutely do it. And I still to this day don't fully understand how he does that. Just extraordinary. And yet, he parks the car, he refused to park in any named bays. He queued up for his own lunch in the canteen. Yeah, fabulous. So, there are amazing leaders out there. And I used to say to him, because he hired me as his mentor to help him transition out of being a CEO into plural career. And I used to say to him, you're so much better leader than ever I was or will be. I struggle to understand why you hire me. And he just looked at me and a slight quizzical smile and said, "Don't worry, Andrew, you'll be the first to know."
Love it. Yeah, I think the scale thing is very interesting. Because typically, if you look at the commercial world, I suppose very commonly, you're going bigger, and you're gradually getting to bigger organizations. Well, one of the things I found very interesting as a military leader was the scale shifts dramatically without necessarily any change whatsoever in rank or salary. So if I look at the two classics for me, when I commanded Kandahar airfield in Afghanistan, which had 25,000 people on it. I wasn't in command of every single one of them. I had about 2,500 under my direct command, but I was responsible for logistics and force protection and air environment for the entire 25,000. And then I went from there to a job in the Ministry of Defence where I had about 25 people, and I was the same rank, same salary, all the rest of it. And I think it was quite good for me when I look back on it, actually, to have that very, very different span of control and different approach that you had to kind of develop, because you get different practical experience. And I mean, another thing I think is, just before we move on to something else, I find it fascinating now the amount of times I talk to people who are leadership experts, in inverted commas, who've written books about leadership. They're clearly academically very, very well up on it, and I fully respect that. I think there's a real place for that academic side. But when you actually quiz them about what have you actually led, then the answer's nothing. In some instances, or very, very few minimal things. And whereas obviously you've got also an awful lot of people, particularly from my old world, where it's you were the opposite. You weren't academically minded at all. And you certainly weren't writing books about stuff, but you were actually very, very much in the practical space. You'd had loads of opportunity to lead, which again is one, going back to that military thing. I think one of the opportunities that the military presented was not only great training and lots of it through life, really, in terms of some of the interventions that I had along the way, but the actual opportunity to do stuff, where you genuinely were empowered in significant roles with significant numbers of people doing chunky things. I mean, if I go back to the Navy thing you were talking about earlier on, and they definitely talk about underwater is boats, by the way. So submarines are boats, and above water is ships.
I couldn't remember which way around it was.
Yeah. They'll get very upset if you talk about surface ships as boats. They tend to get very upset.
Okay, good.
But if you look at, to this day, a Navy commander, so a three-stripe commander who will probably typically be in his 30s or her 30s, in charge of a significant warship, so a Type 45 destroyer or something like that, around the other side of the world somewhere, you can, even in today's world of instant communication and so on, you've got to make some decisions that no one else is able to turn around and help you with at that stage. So there are some really, really, and some of those are life and death, no question about it, and have major geostrategic implications as well, in terms of particularly if you're looking at firing on something that's coming at you in a threatening manner or whatever. And so we put a lot of pressure on people in that environment, which I do think is good, because people benefit from that. You grow as a leader by having those opportunities. I think wrapping people up too much in protective bubbles and not really letting them have the risk envelope that they need is a challenge, isn't it?
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Going backwards, all the way back to the beginning with your 45 years. It's interesting you said 45 years. I joined the Air Force in 1980. Actually, imminently, where are we now? It's the 18th, and in 10 days' time, it is exactly 45 years since I joined the Air Force. So we've got a similar kind of time frame involved there. But when you go all the way back to the beginning, if you were advising young Andrew now, what to do, where to go, how to behave, what kind of stuff to get stuck into, what would you be saying?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think the thing I found hardest to learn was the value of really tapping into the capabilities of the people around me. And as you will know, in our profession, you end up doing a lot of work on yourself, so to speak. And I've certainly done plenty of that. And I've come to understand that I was very badly bullied at a public school, who shall remain nameless, sent to Coventry by all 33 boys in my house for 3 weeks, for instance, and etc. And of course, it taught me self-reliance, but self-reliance under fire is unhelpful if you batten down the hatches and turn away the help that others offer you. And I think probably if I could have learned earlier to manage my threat response, as it were, that came from that experience of being bullied and having to be self-reliant, yeah, I'd have been much better at harnessing the capability around me.
Yeah, really interesting. I'm sorry about the sort of life experience. I mean, it's such a common story, isn't it? Where you've come some of these sort of childhood experiences that affect you much, much later on in life in a way you hadn't really thought about as well. Yeah, fascinating. Really, really interesting one. Highs and lows. I always tend to talk about this. I'm not least because I think every leader's got some. And the sort of first part of it is doing stuff differently. Is there anything, looking across your very diverse career now, that you wish you had done differently, and why?
I think my response to that is driven largely by personality. I don't do regrets. I choose not to do regrets. I mean, the only thing I regret, one business I was involved with, um, we bought it out from the founder because it was bankrupt, and I put all the money in to save the business, and my partner didn't, but we gave him equal shares. I came to regret that later, because he wasn't prepared to put any money in. I risked everything, and yet we, for all sorts of noble reasons, gave each other equal shares. That's probably the only regret that comes to mind from my career. I'm very proud of only one thing of bringing up my children, because my wife is mostly responsible for bringing three wonderful adults into the world, because I've always been what others probably would describe a workaholic. It's just my passion is my work, is my passion. And I was determined that the three children would learn the ability that when things go wrong to reframe it as an opportunity. And I believe that as a passion. If there's one thing I would want any and every human being to learn, is that you are in control of the response that you choose in any situation. It's what kept Viktor Frankl alive through all of the appalling atrocity and the genocide of the Jews. And I think that the capacity for humans to choose the meaning they give to what's happening around them is the most important capacity ultimately. And you can absolutely learn to reframe it. And years ago now, about 10 years ago probably, I came home one day and I heard my son say to his mother, Mum, please, there's nothing we can do to change what happened. Can we now just look at what we do instead going forward? And I did a little fist bump. I'm not very American that way, but I did do a fist bump in the hall and get, yep, they've got it.
Yeah.
And all three of my kids can literally, in 10 minutes, no matter what happens, turn it around. And I would wish that for every human being on this planet, because I think if you know that, so much of the stress, anxiety would just disappear.
No, I agree, and the acrimony that comes from being too backward looking and full of regret, I think is a difficult one. But I'm the same as you. I tend not to harbour lots of regrets. I do forks in the road, where obviously you've got to make some big decisions. I tend to say to people, look, if you get a mile down the road, having decided you're going down that way, then it's too late, potentially to turn back. You just got to get on with it and no, not spend your whole time going if only, because it's totally pointless.
Well, I love that. I love that philosophical idea that any road will get you there. So actually, this idea that the fork really matters is a myth. And what's most important is you put one foot in front of the other, and with the best of intent, follow your path, and your path will come to where it needs to come to.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair, great point. What's the high point then? What's the from a career point of view, what's your high point?
I think the high point has to be actually not only getting the blood transfusion system to work, because there was technically, now we think it was laughably simple, but back in the day it was a huge achievement. The combination of technology in the form of two-dimensional scanners and computer software and human interface, and government had said to me, if you get this to work, we'll buy it. And I remember knocking on the door of the chief medical officer saying, ta-da, you told me 4 years ago that if I got this to work, that you would buy it. And they went, yeah, no money. And I went, that's disappointing. So I went away and I realized that 30% of all blood transfusions were actually medically unnecessary. And there was institutionalized risk that patients were being injected with a foreign substance that could ultimately harm them. I realized, of course, that if you stop that, you save sufficient money to pay for the whole system. And having been a finance director previously, I persuaded a friend of mine who owned a leasing company to take the risk on the first set for Oxford Hospital. And we had 1,500 beds across 4 locations, funded by the future saving in blood transfusion or blood usage. And that was the moment it absolutely flew. And it worked brilliantly. It's gone all around the world. And literally, many thousands of people are alive today and their families safe. Had we not been completely bonkers and persevered when most sane human beings would have given up, that would not be the case today.
Yeah, that's an amazing achievement. Did you get any recognition for that? I mean,
No.
that's pretty disappointing. I mean, ultimately, I think that's quite well, literally a life-saving moment for a lot of people, as you said.
I mean, it was literally all around the world. That the work that we did was copied all around the world, and I don't think I need recognition. I'm just deeply grateful for that opportunity to make that difference to the world. And I'm kind of at my best really when I'm on a mission, and that was a mission to save lives and save money in a healthcare environment, and there's nothing more compelling than a mission that's doing both those things. And as a human being, my whole orientation is service. From 7 years old, I've just been orientated that way. I can't help myself. And so, the George Bernard Shaw quote, and I can never remember the exact words, but this idea of being used up in a cause that's greater than yourself, and at the end of your life being kind of spat out, completely drained and exhausted, is kind of my model of life, and that's a good thing, by the way, not a bad thing. And so, I think the hardest thing, because halfway through, as I mentioned briefly, I did get fired from that job before they reinstated me. That was the hardest thing that had happened to me. I felt that here was my life's work and it had been taken away from me. And luckily it was given back to me for a short time to see it fly. And I sort of feel the same way now about energizing leaders. I back in 1992, when I got this first CEO role, I met a wonderful lady who said to me, "You do realize, Andrew, that as a CEO, you can do more for the health and well-being of your people than I, as a clinician, can, especially in the UK, where we're a national illness service, not a national health service." And I've never forgotten that. It stayed with me. And if you think about it, what's good for business is good for people, is good for business, right? If I create an environment in which people are genuinely cared for, growing and thriving, they will give more discretionary effort, they'll give more energy to my business will do better. And the question I've sat with and still sit with is, why is it that most businesses are so bad at getting that win-win? And that's the essence of energizing leaders. Our hashtag happy Sunday evenings, hashtag accelerating success is how we describe it. Because if I'm really looking forward to Monday morning, it's doing me good, it's doing my business good. And so yes, we're a business, but for me, it's also this phase of my life, its mission. And having been knocking around for a long time now, the one thing that we have is convening power. We can sort of tap people on the shoulder and say, "Come and help here." And I'm not going to rest until we've made a meaningful dent in helping organizations and growing a whole new generation of leaders who know what it is to create those spaces in which people thrive and grow.
Yeah, it's a great mission, and well, full credit to you for that, and also particularly for the blood transfusion bit. I mean, sadly, on the high point thing, every high point there's always a low point somewhere. I mean, you mentioned obviously the being fired thing in the middle of that. Is that the low point, or is there a different low point?
Well, that was a massive low point at the time, definitely. Good for humility. Because I think you have to recognize, especially in the corporate world, that ultimately it is just a job, and others around you have more power than you do, unless you have your own business, of course. So that's maybe one of the reasons why since then I've always had my own business. I think the lowest points for me have been where individuals have, if you like, let me down or betrayed me. I was once in a business co-ownership of a business. We were both employed as employees within that business, and that individual conspired with our board to fire me from the employment role in my own business that I owned 50% of. And I think that's definitely the hardest moment in my life. And you know, I stood up when he gave me the news. I gave him a hug and said, "Look, I forgive you because if I hold this, it will eat into me. And yes, let's renegotiate our relationship and we'll find another way." But yeah, and we did find another way, and we went on to grow the business. What he didn't quite work out was if he fired me, then he had to do it all. So in the end, it slightly backfired on him, and I had a lot of fun, made a lot of money, and had a lot of freedom. But in that moment, that personal betrayal cut very deep.
Yeah, must have been a good bit of Schadenfreude after that, though, as well, with it.
Well, a little bit, yeah. But
yeah, for sure.
I mean, you know, and I think that's true about life in general, right? It's this idea that I was mentioning with my children, that capacity to reframe and to trust that actually what happens. You know, I have a number of mantras or life philosophies, one of which is the best of all things happen at the best of all possible times, and I'm surrounded by people with the best of all possible intent towards me. And even when that's patently untrue, if you hold on to that, what my experience is that then goes on to happen. So the deepest, most painful moment led to a period of enormous fun, freedom, and financial success as it happened. And yeah, so I think in life, if you choose to see the opportunity in the misery, there is always opportunity. It sometimes takes a while to emerge, but if you hold that idea, it is extraordinary how often that comes to be.
No, yeah, and again, another great point. I mean, you mentioned a while ago, not least in the blood transfusion stuff, that it nearly killed you and you sort of high functioning burnout and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Let's talk about well-being and lifestyle and top tips, what you've learned from all of that and what you're doing for your happy Mondays.
The first thing that comes to mind is my old vicar in southwest Wales. So we lived in the old vicarage and walked across the field to church every Sunday. And our vicar was a little bit too fond of the sherry. And it was one of those old churches with a pulpit where you climb up, 6 foot of stairs, and it sort of projects out over the assembled congregation. And every Sunday when he gave his sermon, he would sway alarmingly over the front of this pulpit. And his favorite saying, and I won't try the sing-song Welsh accent, but was "do as I say and not as I do." And "do as I say and not as I do," I often reflect is kind of my my mantra too as a leader. So I'm blessed with a very sound constitution and extraordinary capacity. At the age of nearly 66, I'm still working more than most people have worked in their lives. And my wife said to me last week, "Andrew, you've got to slow down. You're getting old." And I went, "No, I'm not getting old. I'm going to keep doing it." But I mean, I'm being slightly disingenuous. So, what keeps me sane? Every morning I take a bath. And I'm in there for a good half an hour and I reflect, I pray, I meditate, I think about the day ahead. I have protected me time, free of devices, where I just get organized for the day. That's hugely grounding. I go swimming 3 times a week, wherever possible. And I love to read and to learn. If I'm continuously learning, even if I'm extraordinarily busy, if I get a bit weighed down by the stuff I have to do, I'll go and pick out my latest book and read a chapter, and I'm back up and running. So that's how I keep it together. And I am, you need to find your own way and your own rhythm that works for you. But absolutely paying attention to the obvious things: diet, sleep, above all. I never miss my sleep. 8 hours religiously. So sleep is the other great thing for me.
That's good effort if you can actually achieve that. I mean, I love the do as I say, not do as I do. That's a very military term as well. Yeah, that crops up a bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and I used to joke a lot to my guys. I said, "We're here to preserve democracy, not to practice it." So some of the time we'll get if we can't get consensus, then we do live in a hierarchy here, so
Nice.
get on with it. But on the work-life balance thing, I think it's some great points in there, and I completely agree. You've got to find your own way in it, but um, for me also, I think actually as you get older, I mean, because I was really amused with what you were saying about your wife saying you need to slow down. I get exactly that same conversation, of course, and I get you're working harder now than you've ever done before, and you're supposed to be part time, and I go yeah, and and she's right. I mean, she's completely right. I'm not disputing that. I think that's entirely fair. But to be fair, that is I think keeping me healthier.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm slowing down a bit. I know I'm slowing down a bit in terms of some of the stuff I do as I get older. I haven't got the reactions I had when I was 25
Mm.
and all that sort of thing. But actually, I think being motivated to do stuff and continue to be motivated to succeed is really, really important. I think just stopping is a really bad thing. It's like,
Well, there's all this evidence, isn't there, that the way you stay healthy in mind is to use your brain. And I had a little incident earlier in the year where I had flashing lights and loss of vision, and so my doctor said, "Oh my goodness, you maybe you've had a TIA, a mini heart attack." So he packed me off to the hospital. NHS were amazing. I walked in at 8:30. They scanned me and I was back out by 11:30, and I'd seen my brain in an MRI scanner. And the consultant, who looked about 25, that's the first thing. Clearly, was in her 40s, I'm sure. But she said to me, for some of your age, you've got a remarkably, good and undamaged brain. So I came home and said that to my son. He said, "I'm not surprised, Dad. You spend your whole life using it."
yeah,
So
that's a good point.
yeah, and I think at the end of the day, if you follow your passion, the reason I'm not a workaholic is that my life is my work is my life, and when you can see the impact you're having both at an individual and a wider level than that, in a good way, it's like a drug, right? It's the endorphins are released when you see the impact of what you do, and what better than that, as far as I'm concerned, and I don't need to. I'm very fortunate. I've traveled to lots of places around the world, and I do get to take time out. And when I'm off, I'm off. But in between time, if I was doing something, I could never get my head around these people that do work they hate.
Mm.
I just don't get it. I've never ever done anything I've not loved and been passionate about, and nor will I. I think that is number one priority. Find your passion and follow it.
Yeah, we completely share that. I say that to people quite regularly. If you're not enjoying what you do, fine, you might have highs and lows in what you do, but if you're not enjoying it on a kind of daily average basis, then you need to find something else to do. I mean, it's crazy to waste your life just doing stuff that you're not
Completely.
enjoying.
Yeah.
And like you, I've been very lucky. I mean, I've managed to successfully enjoy everything I've done in the military and beyond it,
Mm.
which has been really, really great. I always try and tap into kind of the current experience of the people I've got on the podcast, and for
Mm.
you, obviously, energizing leaders. You're working with a lot of senior people, doing a lot with them in what are, by any definition, economically and geopolitically pretty challenging times. I'm
Mm.
just really interested
Mm.
in what you're hearing and what kind of reflections you're getting from people out there in terms of the world we live in, really, as much as anything
Yeah.
else.
So I think what I'm hearing is it is an extraordinary time. It's almost like the perfect storm. You've got the geopolitical uncertainty. Arguably we've got multiple dictators around the world, one of whom I won't mention because he'll probably sue me for billions. And you've got the economic uncertainty that's partly triggered by the geopolitical uncertainty. We've got inflation. The whole generations of people have grown up without inflation. We're old enough to remember it, but that's suddenly surprising people and hurting people in a very personal way. Climate change, you see the impact of harsher weather conditions emerging. Post COVID, we're still in burnout. Look, there's so much when you look at it through that lens that, as it were, in terms of headwinds. And I observe there are really two kinds of leader. One that gets lost in the commotion, in the storm, And there are those that have this capacity to get into the eye of the storm and find a place of calm and peace within the storm while the storm rages around them. And I think the fundamental key to getting into that space of calm in the middle of the storm is curiosity and a philosophical choice that if I choose it to be, this will be good. And that they can reframe and make good things out of what would otherwise be a challenge. And I kind of see two kinds of people: one that are getting overwhelmed, stressed, lost, and those that can, through curiosity, get into that space that I choose to be an optimist about the world. I choose to be an optimist about human beings. I choose to see AI as something that will add to humanity, not detract. And having made that choice, they then live that choice. And so have a fantastic positive impact on the world around them. And certainly, as a leader and supporter of leaders, that's what I choose to be, even though you might say evidence is very much to the contrary.
Really interesting. I mean, I think it's going to be fascinating. It's never been a more interesting time to think if I had a crystal ball and look forward 50 years, what would it look like? Because I share your view on all of those things. And I think the obvious one that is probably the biggest unknown in some ways in there is the AI thing, particularly in the world of work, how much difference it's actually going to make. And we could probably have an entire conversation just around that. But it is, for some people, it's disaster area, of epic proportions, and others it is, as you say, a massive opportunity. I'm going to be fascinated, really going to be fascinated to see, even in the next 5 or 10 years, where that goes, because it's clearly is accelerating at an incredible level. Just playing around with the tools.
I had to take my own medicine on that, Bob. So I'm 65, and I started my business, launched it in 2019. The first thing that happened was COVID. So we survived COVID, and then as we came out of COVID, AI appears. And I don't know if you know the television series One Foot in the Grave,
yeah,
Victor Meldrew. Yeah. I definitely, about AI, I'm definitely in the camp of I don't believe it. A while ago, I just took the decision. Now, come on, Andrew, if you're committed to the mission, you just have to change your view. In that moment, I said I'm going to embrace AI, and I actually now find it utterly fascinating, really loving it. We're embracing it in our own business, and I'm helping other leaders embrace it as well. So yeah, I had to take my own medicine on that one.
No, I think you're in great company as well, because it's a conversation I've had quite a bit where people say, particularly of a certain age and a sort of an experience level, where they're kind of going, "Oh, well, I can just ride this out. It's not really going to affect me." But actually, if you're a leader, you got to lead, and you're paid to lead. You're paid to make decisions. You're paid to be focused on this stuff, and therefore, at least having a decent level of understanding of what the opportunities are, what the threats are, what the challenges are, what the tools do, and getting yourself in amongst it, I think is really, really important. So yeah, good for you. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. You are, I know from our prior conversations, on the cusp of both a book and a podcast that you're launching, and obviously now as about to join me as a fellow podcaster, I'm really interested in that. Tell us a bit about both ventures, though.
Yeah, so the book is probably going to be called The Altitude Factor. So our core metaphor is a balloon, and the idea is that the organization is the balloon. The human energy is the program that lifts the balloon in the hands of the leaders as catalysts for that energy. And so what we're looking to do is to gain altitude. And it's essentially going to talk about what have I come to know over the last 10 years, thinking and working with leaders through this lens of energy. And they always say, don't they, about a book, firstly, that the book has to have you, not the other way around. So I definitely feel the need to write it. Secondly, that in the writing of it, it forces you to get really clear about what you really do think and believe, and it's certainly doing that. But also, I think the power of the book is that you can reach people you don't know, and it can go places you wouldn't otherwise get to. And that's my hope for it, because it links back to the mission, right? It's hashtag Happy Sunday Evenings is what we're really about. And the podcast is really, I'm just fascinated, as you are, to meet people. And it's a very simple frame for the podcast. We start with what energizes you right now. We invite you to reflect on how you maintain your energy in the current world, both in general and specifically in your business. and how energy has operated through your career. And finally, what would you recommend for others? If what's your hot tip on maintaining energy going through life? And yeah, I mean, I've got sort of 4 in the can, so to speak. So we'll be starting to launch. Not as ambitious as you, Bob. We're going 1 a month for now. I've got 3 other jobs alongside it. But I'm just fascinating, absolutely loving it, and already, and I'm a complete novice. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that fascinates me about it, and I perhaps bit off, no more than I can chew. But am I regretting doing it weekly? Now it's a mission. I've got to keep going
I got to do that.
But because it is one of those things. But I think you learn a lot from the people you talk to. 100%. I mean, there's never a guest interview I do where I don't learn from people, and I think it's terrific to have those kind of conversations. And I think what I've also learned is lots and lots of people who you wouldn't necessarily expect to be interested in some of this stuff are interested in the guest interviews and the kind of diversity of themes that come out and so on. So it is a great medium to do that. Well, I wish you the best of luck with both ventures. I think they'll be exciting to watch the progress. I shall be fascinated to see how they develop. 2 questions that I always finish with all of my guest interviews. They're both short for most people, and you may have already answered the first one, but it's depends. What's the most memorable event of your career so far? Individual event.
Memorable individual event of my career. Yeah, I mean, I think it is the one we've talked about before, is actually cracking what people had told me wasn't possible. Better people than you have tried and failed, dear boy. And when we rolled it out across 4 sites in Oxford, and it worked brilliantly, and from day one we were literally saving people. Well, we were not only saving lives, but actually we were saving money at the same time as well. So we were de-risking literally hundreds of patients from the moment we went live. Yes, that's definitely my best moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. As we've talked about, it's a fantastic achievement. And last but not least, because some people find this one interesting, is what's the most difficult question you've ever been asked?
Yeah, so the hardest question for me is, what do you want? Because I am so deeply ingrained, and my whole character is about serving others. Actually, deciding what I want for myself is really hard. And that's not always helpful, right? Because especially in a business context, and you're the leader and owner, you have to be clear about where you're trying to get to. So I'm quite intuitive, instinctive. I'm not a big believer in goals for the sake of goals. I go against all the literature there. So yeah, the hardest question is, what do you want, Andrew, for you?
Interesting, fascinating. What a great discussion. I knew it would be when we started off, Andrew. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And, so many good insights, and I wish you the best of luck with everything you're doing with the company and with the podcast and with the book and all that sort of stuff. So hopefully we'll keep in touch.
Well, thank you for listening, Bob. And yeah, I'm sure we'll speak many times as we go forward. So
yeah,
that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. Take care.
Bye-bye.
I really hope you've enjoyed this episode with Andrew. I thought it was a terrific conversation. I always knew it was going to be, because we're doing such similar stuff, having come from very different start points, and that always makes for an interesting combination. And I was introduced to Andrew a little while back, and it's been very fruitful as a conversation. So I think there's real value in everything that he says, and I'm very excited about his book potentially upcoming and his podcast as well, because I think that'd be terrific. But if you've enjoyed it, then please do all the things I normally ask you to do. Please share it, please comment on it, please push it around to your friends so other people get to listen to it. If you haven't already done so, please like or follow the show, so you're actually subscribing and getting frequent notice of new upcoming episodes, etc. And if you're up for it, then please think about that financial support aspect for the show as well, because it does make a very big difference. And very small subscriptions, but at the end of the day, they really, really help. So no compulsion, but if you're able to do it, and you're feeling you've been listening for a while or watching for a while and you're finding it useful, I would be enormously grateful if you'd consider buying me a cup of coffee a month, and that will be all you need to do. But thanks ever so much for listening anyway. I really appreciate it. All the very best, and be back again soon. Take care. Bye now.